Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would like to thank the Afghan-American Association for such a timely gathering. I'm here to present you a summary of my research on the role of a national state and its interconnection with human rights and make a comparative analysis with the current situation in Afghanistan, how the Taliban look to the national state. According to my analysis, there are 5 fundamental principles of interconnection between human rights and national state. The first and important interaction is the human rights are a dynamic relationship between citizens and the state. Here the state is a provider and guarantee the fundamental principles of human rights. The state guarantees civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights to its citizens. The second important element of interaction between the human rights and the state is called legitimacy. The citizens, by having a dynamic relationship with the states, provide national legitimacy for the state. So the state, by having a dynamic relationship with the citizens and their political participation, receive kind of national political legitimacy. And this national legitimacy paving the way for the state for the international legitimacy. The third element of a national state in promotion of human rights is the role of civil society. The civil society at the national state level is a monitoring machinery of the human rights situation in a country. So civil society bridging the citizens with the state on the situation of human rights. And finally, the fifth one, the rule of law. Rule of law means that the state should guarantee the independent and professional judicial system in order to monitor the situation of human rights. And the citizens should have some mechanisms to claim against any violations of human rights. So these 5 fundamental principles are the basis for human rights in a national state. So if you make a comparative analysis of this national state's 5 criteria with the Talibanism or the de facto regime of Taliban, you can make a conclusion that the Taliban do not believe on the national state. Even the Taliban do not believe on a state infrastructure. Their political system is based on theology, the domination of a political and ideological method of religious institutions over the whole country. So for the Taliban, there are 5 fundamental tools in order to restrict the role of human rights in Afghanistan. The first one is the Taliban legislation. My previous fellow speakers, they have spoken about the Taliban legislative system. According to my research, the Taliban have 3 sources of the legislation. The first one, the instruction of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who's sitting in Kandahar. The second source of legislation of the Taliban is the fatwa. Fatwa means the interpretation of a religious school of thoughts of Taliban for the implementation to the judicial system. The third element of source of legislation of the Taliban is the decisions of the Supreme Court of the Taliban. The Supreme Court of the Taliban and the leader of the Supreme Court, Maulana Haqqani, is the doctrine maker of the Talibanism. So he's a very close ally to Mullah Hibatullah in Kandahar. So all three sources for Taliban legislation are acting together to restrict human rights in Afghanistan with a special focus on women's rights in the country. They would like to erase the role of women in the society. The second element that the Taliban are very focusing in it, this is the strategic approach of Taliban. Some people may argue that the Taliban do not have any strategy. I don't agree with that. I don't buy this notion. The Taliban have a very sophisticated strategy. The Taliban strategic vision is to build a society based on religious violence. That's a very dangerous vision for the future of Afghanistan. The vision of the Taliban to build a capable infrastructure to implement the Taliban notion, which we call it Talibanism. So the strategy of Taliban are acting precisely against human rights and focusing with restriction of the role of women in Afghanistan. The third element that the Taliban using for the restriction of human rights in the country is the Taliban policies. According to political science, the policy means the organization of power. And the power based on the international law have two main resources. The first source of power, this is the financial and natural power of the political power. The second element and the second source of political power, this is the human resources. The Taliban do not believe in the human resources about the role of women at all. So that's also a very sophisticated and dangerous policy for Taliban. The third element is the Taliban mechanism in instructions, in structural instructions. All mechanisms which reformed by Taliban based on their strategy. So that's why they are reorganizing the political infrastructure in Afghanistan in order to implement their vision and mission. And finally, the police, the law enforcement body. The law enforcement body in Afghanistan should be, according to the international law and political science, should be a mechanism to strengthen citizens' social and political security. But the Taliban system acting totally against it. The police in Taliban is doing a political and ideological prosecution of any Afghans who are having human rights values in his philosophy. So that's why these 5 elements, comparing with the 5 elements of national state, are working totally against each other. So that's why my conclusion is, when the law, when the strategy, when the politics, when the infrastructure, and when the legal system and law enforcement bodies altogether acting against the role of women in a society, what do you want to call it? It is a manifestation of gender apartheid. So that's why it's very important that we understand the difference between apartheid and discrimination. Apartheid means that all system, the law, the strategy, the structures, the policies in the law enforcement bodies acting against a vulnerable group. And this vulnerable group in Afghanistan are women. Thank you very much.